So delay.
Okay, we're live stream. Hello, everybody. Today's webinar in the frame of Democratic Agenda that is organized in partnership with Liberty Institute, Tabula Media, and Culture for Democracy, which I represent, and my name is Anna Raboshenko. Today we're going to be discussing the culture economy and the hybrid warfare, and we have a distinguished guest with us. This is Lucine Haratyan from Armenia. She's writer, curator, and anthropologist. We have Alina Derevyanka, culture manager from Belarus, and Yeta Bagari, cultural tourism analyst. Before we start our conversation, I would like to give you a floor, and so you to a little bit present yourself to the wider audience. So, Lucina, let's start with you, please.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to discuss things with Georgians, Belarusians, and other people from our region somehow, with whatever the region, however we define that region, right? So I am a writer and I'm a cultural anthropologist based in Yerevan. And I would be glad to share some thoughts regarding the questions that we will be discussing today. I am also a researcher associated with the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography at Yerevan, and also I work at Yerevan State University. That's it about me.
Thank you, Lucina. Thank you. Alina, please. Floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you also for invitation. It's also a nice company to be here. I'm a cultural manager. I'm used to be a director of cultural heritage NGO in Belarus between 2013 and 2022, and we were closed by the Belarusian authorities, and I will shortly also talk about this later. And now I'm a freelance cultural manager. I work for publishing house Flambaum. We publish Belarusian women and other translation into Belarusian written by women. And I also teach in European Humanities University as a lecturer of the cultural heritage and cultural management studies. And I work for different cultural projects also internationally. It would be nice to share my thoughts also on the topic.
Thank you, Alina. Iya, please.
I am Yeta Bagari. I'm based half in Tbilisi, half in one of the main wine producing regions in Georgia. So for many years, I was working as ethnologist and then as a researcher in tourism. And finally, I'm tourist analyst and also founder of a company which is fully focused on the cultural tourism. And we work internationally. Among our partners are mainly Europeans, Americans. And so we try to put one brick in the development of cultural tourism, including heritage, material, and non-material culture. And so combination of tourism, ethnology, and also these small businesses, it consists with a big picture. And our goal is to make everything high quality and plus to educate young people. Thank you.
Thank you. With such a great company today, it's a bit a hard topic that we're going to discuss today, but unfortunately, this hybrid warfare affects us all on a daily basis. It not only affects the countries that we live in and the circumstances and the situations we have to work and survive are pretty harsh. And that's why we want to discuss this subject, basically from a personal experience, from the experience of the institutions we represent or were represented previously, and so on and so on. This is we try to understand basically what are the similarities of this power and how we can sustain this maybe together, maybe with sharing the experience. Obviously, we're not able to solve all the problems within the conversations, but at least it will be interesting to us to hear each other's stories and maybe be able to understand it better and possibly find out also some solutions for the future, and even a possible cooperation may be also very useful. So to open up our discussion, I would like to ask the first question, which is basically focused on what are the main weapons of the disinformation, of the hybrid warfare, basically, that we feel ourselves, that touches us as an individuals and touches our institutions, and particularly are visible in our country. So Alina, I would like to ask with you, you are at the moment working from the exile, and tell us a little bit about the story and what are the main things that affect you mostly and your institution.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I would say like in Belarus, the main disinformation is not only about like spreading a false information, but about controlling the information, controlling the narratives that are spread among the people. And the main kind of weapon in this, I would say, that affected most of the cultural institutions and organization is this massive repression against civil society and cultural institutions. So since summer 2021, a lot of cultural institutions and independent organization who was like doing this independent culture, not official narrative culture, but something like independent and critical. Most of them were closed forcefully, and I just checked, like it's not only cultural, but about 1,200 NGOs was closed since that time for the last 4 years. So it means it was like dramatic situation for the
Well, what are these approximately in percentage, like considering the size of the country of Belarus when we're talking about such a huge number of NGOs approximately? Is it like more than half or?
I think it's up to 80% of active, or 90, and the rest would be like this, pro-governmental NGO. So like, I mean, most of the independent were forcibly closed or have to be closed themselves, but still it was a forced decision, also because of the controlling of costs and basically cutting all the possible financing, international but also national. It's super hard to receive any funding in Belarus actually now. Yeah, and the second weapon, I would say, this is the so-called list of extremism. And we have this list, it's something like a foreign agent, but even worse. So it's they label NGO organization as well as cultural organizations as an extremist organization. And it means if you on this list as an organization, everyone connected to this organization can be sentenced to the penalty.
Prison, yeah, penalty.
Depending, like if you're like participating in it, or you're working, or you're supporting it. So it means like dependent on this connection, it's like from 2 to 4 to 5 years of prison. So it means they kind of control, of course, that even because many organizations. Many people who was leading these organizations, they have to flee, so they left the country since 2021, and then they established new organizations in these neighboring countries like Lithuania, Poland, Germany, and some others. And to control the activity of this organization, even from outside, they start to put this organization also on the list of extremism, so that the people who is still traveling or living in Belarus would think twice or more if they want to be engaged in any activity of such extremist organizations. And the same with the information. So we have like a list of the extremist channels or extremist portals or websites that are not accessible from Belarus. and if you are visiting them or subscribing or following, and somebody will check your phone and find it, you also would be detained.
Punishable.
Yeah, punished or detained. So it means they kind of control it, what information people are like receiving or like keeping on their devices. I mean, of course, still people use VPN and all other things, but of course, it's a lot of pressure because you cannot store the information. You have to be careful what you keep, and all the links and all the connections you have to check.
Just to understand it better, like what, for instance, what kind of information can be considered as a legal information or is punishable?
Yeah, I mean, there is a like a on a there is a state extremist list of the different media, websites, projects, books, and other media that are recognized as extremist by Belarusian state. It means everything that if you have this book and it's extremist, then you can be punished. If you open a website and you just read it, but then it's stored in your memory and you visited it, even this can be, if you subscribed for the channel, Instagram channel that is on this extremist list and you liked it, then you can be punished. So like any connections from your
So
device.
anything what is basically neutral and not really fighting the government's propaganda, but just neutral or pro-European or pro-Western can be considered as the extremist organization, right?
Yeah, it can be put on this list, and if it's official on this list, after that it's considered extremist. So
Yeah.
it's have to go through the court and then put on this list. But yeah, basically everything. I mean, yeah, it's just a long story to tell what's there, but yeah, I can tell it maybe a bit later.
Thank you, Alina. Yeah, it's really harsh, and to imagine, though, for us as the Georgians, it's getting closer. Lucine, I'd like to jump to you. While being in Armenia these days, we're very much looking forward, and I'm pretty sure for the Belarus, it's also a pretty good example these days, like the Armenia that is challenging and changing this pressure and somehow fighting, because we're really looking forward to the positive changes. It affects us all, of course, but still there must be this pressure that is understandable and visible on a daily basis. What do you think? How does it affect the institutions and organizations in Armenia, or like personal authors and writers or artists who are working in the fields? Does it affect the subject? Does it affect the concepts that they're working with? And are they like the works are more sustainable, becoming more sustainable, or fighting these concepts, or how it's?
I think it's a very different and interesting situation in Armenia now, because it's a bit like it's more open, obviously, and most of cultural organizations and also individual artists and writers have freedom to write and do things they want to write or do. At least there is no obvious pressure from the government. But of course, it doesn't mean that there is no warfare, hybrid warfare going on. But in this case, it's not like it's not things imposed by the government explicitly. It would more be that artists who are, for example, speaking or writing about things like which are not within this national patriotic realm, could be targeted by not the government, for example, but by either small opposition groups or by some people who are backed by outside interest, right? And then, so it's a different form of the warfare. It's not censorship or government imposed. It's not a government imposed censorship, but rather it's being part either one or the other narrative. And as Alina was already telling, it's also about narratives and which like what kind of narratives are you either supporting or writing or promoting. Depending on that, you can be a target either for the pro-democratic groups, because, for example, that we have artists who are within nationalistic thinking, right? So if your thought is more within nationalism or patriotism, then you can be targeted by the groups that are more liberal and not that much, they don't share that nationalistic vision. Or if your thought on writing and creative art is more liberal, then you are an easy target for the other groups. So that's a different situation, but it doesn't mean that this war between different narratives, or I would say between different value systems, is not happening. And of course, you can also see that some of it is politically backed. For example, some attacks can be by people who are obviously supported by Russia, and then people or artists who are, for example, creating things which are not that much in the traditional way of thinking, or at least, well, it's not exactly traditional. It's like, it's not framed as traditional way of thinking. They can be easily ridiculed and not simply attacked, but made really, there could be attempts to devaluate their work because it's not within, for example, traditional patriotic or nationalist thinking about the reality or about the future. So whatever you say, on the other hand, it's free, like it's really free. You can say whatever you think, you can do whatever you want generally, but it doesn't mean that you would not be attacked. And it's not simply attacking, but it's also about diminishing the value of the work created and making it less acceptable by the general public. And that is through making these people traitors of national identity, creating narratives around them which would frame them as Turk lover, or because in the Armenian context, that's also one of the main conflicts existing. So that warfare is there. As I said, government is not prohibiting any kind of creative work or any kind of art or any kind of cultural organization to function. Still, the war at the level of media, at the level of social media, and at the level of narratives is there and happening. I mean, if I generalize it this way. And of course, it's very different from the situation in Belarus. And unfortunately, in Georgia also, it is getting more and more difficult as far as I know. But still, it doesn't mean that we should fully feel like, I mean, that it's not, I would say that it's not very, there are certain topics which are very easy targets for some of the parts or participants of this hybrid warfare. And one of the most vulnerable topics would be, as I said already, it's like not even favorable, but not criticizing things towards Azerbaijan or Turkey. Being more pro-peace can be also targeted. And the most vulnerable would be also LGBT-related topics in the arts. These could also be easy targets for that kind of groups.
So basically what you're saying, if we can just generalize the subjects, there is a battle between the real identical questions. So the identity in reality, like whether we should be more pro or
How we
global
define
or
our identity.
yeah.
Like the issue is it's a very interesting moment when really the government is speaking about redefining national identity. And it's not widely that the way they kind of try to redefine it, it is not widely accepted. But there is all different possibilities within that range. But generally, society and cultural practitioners, organizations, including, are trying to redefine it in one way or the other. And while from the outside it might simply seem as being either West or Russia, it's not. It has much more deeper layers than simply Russia versus Europe. And all that layers are internally becoming part, promoting one of the narratives, whether they want it or they don't want. And even if they don't promote any narrative, they can be easily presenting it as promoting this side or the other side. So it's also a very dangerous time in sense of, like, even if you are really sure about your values and you are expressing those values or you are creating something, you never know how it would be manipulated and by whom.
Thank you, Luciana. Indeed, they're like interesting times. On one hand, it's very difficult times, but what I see from what we're talking so far, we are as a nations all experiencing this reshaping the identities because we've been somehow isolated of the
That's
real
for sure.
identity concepts, and we've been part of the Soviet Empire previously, having experience with Russia and so on. It's hard, it's really tough and difficult. And indeed, if we really want to build up a sustainable nations, and we have to go through these processes, we have to find out the ways. It's a long process, but eventually maybe it will lead us to something which we can really call our own identities. Yeah, referring what we were talking here with the discussing with Alina and Lucina, what can you tell us about the Georgian case? Like, what are the hybrid war, the main subjects of the hybrid war, and what do you think, like, how it affects us? Your microphone is off.
Sorry. First of all, I want to speak about cultural tourism because what's happening in the country, in the countries, or in a neighborhood or region, the cultural tourism is like a presentation of everything, each detail, all aspects of the culture of the region. And unfortunately, what happens in Georgia that government is not interested in developing culture or to keep this culture, and so it's not priority, and this is the biggest problem. And what I was listening from Belarus presenter, that we are pretty close to this situation, that each word or article or whatever, everything will be controlled, and this is really very bad for the future. And I can say that, so what I'm monitoring last years, that the knowledge is decreasing. I don't mean that generation which still cares a huge responsibility and education, but in general, cultural education at schools, at universities, it's very low quality right now. I'm very sorry to say that, but so I think you agree that for many years in Georgia we had really good education in terms of cultural heritage, many institutions, and those people, they left jobs, not themselves, sometimes they were just fired. And when I say that, it's not priority, because what is the culture of the country? It is not only museum or picture galleries, right? It is archaeology is part of the culture, and all cultural tours when we want to show the best of our country to international visitors. we start from archaeology, not only archaeological sites, but also like old wineries, fortresses, monasteries, wall paintings. And we have a lot of common with Armenia as a regional, let's say, main culture. And if compare cultural heritage of Georgia and Armenia, what we normally use in tourists, this is pretty similar things. For many years we discovered interesting, we were trying to develop it, to keep, and plus to make it more comfortable to reach for tourists, travelers, visitors. What is good happening in the country, like during last 10 years, let's say that in many towns and cities in Georgia, there are polyphonic music schools are established, and which gives me a hope that many children just sing, they play traditional instruments, and many of them dance, and most important is that they're singing all chant music, like church music, and this is one of the ways that it will be survived.
And what you would say about the subject, how this hybrid warfare affects us a little bit? What do you feel like? You mentioned that what Alina was describing, we're getting closer to this. Like besides these traditional forms of expression in culture field, which is, we know that in Soviet times as well, they used this as a good propaganda tools because so-called traditional art was easier to also to empty from its own like the identity concepts and just leave it on the surface as a form. So do you think it's also kind of like a tendency and similarities where it's easier to keep on going with the traditional, let's say, polyphony music and don't relate it to the concept of the identity and freedom and everything, whatever, like how you would describe this, like what are the tendencies in the field these days, like what the creative contemporary approaches are they, like as you mentioned that there is no will of the government to develop something in a culture field. So would we believe that the polyphony would sustain this somehow, or it's just an excuse to ignore everything else? Like how you would describe this?
According to old Greek philosophers, they said that if we don't have culture, why do we exist? And this is culture is first of all important for us, for humans, because this is our identity. This is we're proud with our culture, and this is business for us. These days in the world, everything is connected with businesses, yeah, and economic prosperity. But culture is, first of all, the two things that for the society, for humans, and plus for economy. And so when we say that it's not only in Georgia, but in Georgia now it's very noticeable, and I think it's very dangerous what government, let's say, is playing with people, with cultural society, with those like, let's say, researchers, scientists, sculptors, artists, because they're like an enemy. And why it's happening? Because I think that in the government, they're not people who can realize value of culture, value of arts, and plus I was afraid, and a couple of times I mentioned that if we will continue like this way, our culture will be kept only in the museum because it will be disappeared among society, among cities. And I'm always mentioning the generations and what they're getting, what kind of education. It's almost empty. And not only polyphonic singing, but polyphonic singing, I mentioned that something is good happening because some years ago we were afraid that this polyphonic singing and chant music would be lost. But fortunately, it is not happening. And we have to mention this, of course, that it takes like only a couple of years to do something to support these cultural educational programs.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, indeed, we are like the culture field was the first that have been affected by the repressions from the at least visible, and it started few more years even before, a few earlier than the rest of the other fields. These days, like the best Georgian authors and actors and representatives of culture are in jail or imprisoned. A lot of people, professionals, as you mentioned, they lost their jobs because they were literally fired, and a lot of institutions been robbed and basically destroyed in terms of like all the institutions that when Alina started this discussion, those that have been more independent and those even within the government structures, these institutions, they've been repressed, the directors been changed or they've been merged with those institutions in order to establish the control over this institution, because you can't stain the propaganda, the disinformation if you have an independent field representatives, especially within the system. And of course, the independent ones, because maybe the culture field is also very visible because people know them and they're listening to them, they're trusted, they're loved by the public, and it's always easy, very important for the propaganda hybrid warfare to control the culture. This is not a surprise for us. So I'd like to go back to Alina, like how basically we survive in exile, how it ended up actually in exile, the Belarusian culture. You already mentioned that there was a series of repressions and there still are present there. It's almost impossible to sustain and survive in Belarus. What are your experiences? How you're working from exile, and what are the subjects that you're working on? I understand that it's still most of the scope of your work is still about Belarus and around the Belarusian subject. So tell us a little bit more. How is it going?
Mhm. Yeah, of course, yeah, as you mentioned, the situation for many cultural workers dramatically changed since this wave of repressions, and also like you just explained, a lot of cultural workers lost their jobs. Me personally, I was still in Belarus till actually this winter, so I only left this January, which is pretty a lot. I mean, like most of my colleagues left already in 21, 22, after these organizations were closed. And of course, for many, for me personally, the only possibilities was like this. Still have these connections with some international projects or projects that are organized by the organizations that are established outside of Belarus. So all these new cultural NGOs that established by Belarusians in Poland or Lithuania or some other countries, they continue try to do some projects inside Belarus. And so some people like me who was still able to stay in Belarus was trying to organize some activities, but of course it was very limited. It's mostly like just to save the connection with people, just to give the space for some smaller events. We cannot organize a bigger festivals or something. But at the same time, somehow there is a new generation of younger people who used like when we had all this protests and repression was like under 20 or something, and now I was seeing that they were like again a bit like a new new generation that like also wants something, and they do organize some festivals and things. So it's also wrong to say it's that nothing actually happening, because there are things happening. And I admire these people because they don't have this fear. They haven't experienced it because they were kind of too young or they were not in a cultural field. There are still some people that are like from a previous that are trying to do some events. So you kind of, I would say the strategy is like trying to balance and to find different ways for survival. So most people also do some freelancing and work I don't know, in some IT design sphere, and in their part-time do some cultural work and events and things like this. So somehow they're still possible, but of course it's much less than it was in 2019 or 20. So it's, I would say, like this kind of different strategies, trying to keep the network, trying still, even if you are in Belarus. For me, for example, it was super important when I was still in Belarus to go to different conferences and events outside Belarus, to connect with colleagues who left, but also with other colleagues from our region, to know the situation in another countries and to exchange and also speak publicly, because within the country I cannot speak. So this way of support is also very important, that the people from Belarus still invited to the events and conferences. And yeah, it's risky, but it's our own risk. I mean, the person who is invited, he can say no, but at the same time it's important to give the chance to the people who is still in Belarus and try to balance between these situations. And I think like there are organizations, for example, like Belarusian Council of Culture, which was established after 21 and based in Estonia. They are working that they are attracting bigger resources from European Union and then redistributed, like doing regranting for smaller initiatives, also within the Belarus. So the idea is that these organizations who left and these professionals who left, they continue to work for Belarusian culture. And maybe the most visible field, I would say, this publishing field, because actually we have I would say a bit of a rise of a publishing houses outside. Somebody told me that it's about 30 publishing houses outside Belarus that are focused actually on books in Belarusian language, mostly, or of course Belarusian writers or translators in translations into Belarusian language. So it's kind of also a work that have to be done by people who left. So I think the strategy is, from one side, to try to find the ways to support people who is still inside Belarus and give them opportunity to speak, or to some capacity buildings, I don't know, like some support somehow. And at the same time, if you're outside Belarus, find the ways that you're still doing work for Belarusian culture.
Yeah, thank you, Alina. So basically, it's in fact, it's culture in culture resilience, and it's very important what you mentioned. This new wave of like a new generation still exists, and this all support gives us hope that basically they can sustain the situation, and eventually, at some point, there will be a new wave. We are looking forward to it, and hope, yeah. Lucina, what can you tell us about the how these new tendencies are? What is the economical support and the situation today is in the culture field in Armenia? What do you think? Like, what are the promising fields? How
Just
it's like?
to comment on what Alina was telling, and I will go to your
Sure.
question. I think it's a very, very sad situation, of course, with Belarus, but I think it was also push for the language to revive. So what I want to say, that all this effort that is put by different Belarusian artists who are outside the country, they actually create a very interesting new wave of Belarusian culture and literature, particularly. So it's very interesting to see how it is evolving, and I am with you. I hope it really resists and gets better. That's it. So with respect to the support that cultural sphere is getting in Armenia, I think it's much better now compared to how it was before, because state funding of different cultural institutions and initiatives is growing. It has grown and it is continuing to grow, which is good. We see a lot of new, really very interesting and new theatrical works, new art exhibitions, new exhibitions in different museums, renovated museums, and not only local things, but also, for example, um, some things that come from other museums to be exhibited in Armenia. For example, initiatives like there is this famous bust of goddess Anahit, which Armenians believe is an Armenian goddess, which is usually exhibited in British Museum with a script like being from Anatolia or Turkey. So it was exhibited last year, almost entire year in Armenia, and open for everybody to go and see it. What I'm trying to say that there is really unprecedented support for culture by the government in terms of funding. Of course, it's never enough, and particularly for artists, the most of the artists, and I can speak more about writers probably because I have mentioned, I have forgot to mention that one of my important identities is also probably being a member of PEN Armenia, which I am really very proud of being member, and really also being for most of the ideas of PEN. So I would say that while most writers, of course, do other work to support their families, still there is now some opportunities for them to get some state grants for writing, for example, or for translation of Armenian literature into other languages. Of course, it's not everybody who benefits from it, but still there are some opportunities. But what I would like to also speak of, there are also European projects and programs, as you know, such as Creative Europe, which provides opportunities for cultural exchange, but also for cultural
Is it
projects.
increased within the last years?
Yeah, and it is EU funding in general is increasing, and cultural sphere is also, support of the cultural sphere is also increasing. And that also helps for cultural organizations, particularly NGOs, not state organizations, to survive and to diversify their resources. So I would say there is more opportunities in terms of funding. And I think it is now, cultural sphere in general is really blooming, because you can see so many different things happening, but not only in terms of the quantity, also different in terms of their quality, their vision, their belonging, I would even say, where they come from, what they speak about, what they do. So it is really changing, and it's very interesting to observe that change. Of course, it's not like you don't see big things immediately, but this is how things change. If you provide more support, more freedom, more opportunity, then you are going to see better things. And this also creates quality. This also creates new,
And a healthy
I would say,
competition, right?
and a healthy competition. But what I would like to also speak about, because our today's conversation is about hybrid warfare. So I would say that if before the last Karabakh war, for example, in many Armenian, in arts, culture, for example, decolonial topics vis-a-vis Russia would not be present, or they would be very little present. We now see more and more this kind of, I would say, these kind of things in different spheres of arts and culture, which is already interesting. And it speaks about, since we spoke about identity, how you redefine yourself with in relation to whom, and so on. So this is quite new, and there is more and more in that direction from different artists, which also speaks about very lively and evolving cultural sphere. This is only one of the topics I touch upon, and why specifically this topic, because this is what is also new. And this is what is political. And this is what relates to hybrid warfare that we are speaking about. Of course, there are other things also happening, but since this is related to our today's conversation, I wanted to bring this also in. There are also feminist topics are now very kind of interestingly growing and becoming one of the interesting developments. So I would say that culture in Armenia is having its very good times in general. I don't know, because I would like to tell this as well. Armenians, due to our history and everything, are always cautious. We are always cautious to believe that good things can happen. So it's like people are saying, oh, you see, this is happening, but then they say, oh, okay, but let's not be very happy, not be very, I don't know, inspired, because you never know what could happen. So it's cautiously changing, but also cautiously opening up. I don't know how long this would stay like it is, but if it continues evolving in this direction, I think we would see really interesting things in the sphere of culture. And it includes both government effort with its increased funding and support, but also it includes many new young artists and artists from older generation creating different things, fresh things, and in some cases political things, which are also helping to change the narrative.
Thank you, Lucinda. You mentioned the colonial concept, which is pretty interesting because throughout the conversations we had previously with the participants from Ukraine, from Armenia, from Belarus as well, like this was a widely mentioned subject actually. It's still not really accepted by the West, by the concept, the concept
Yes,
of the
yes.
colonialism in terms of
How does it apply? Does it apply to us or not, and so on?
yeah, whether this is the colonial approach or not, or decolonial approach, but in fact that we all the countries are experiencing, not only us, but the Western countries as well, the Dutch countries like, let's say, former Soviet republics, or like so former countries occupied or influenced by the Soviet Union, even though they are facing the same problem and this Hippocratic attitude that we face on a daily basis, it still affects them as well, not less than us, in fact. And maybe we are, in fact, somehow can be considered as the polygons for the experimenting on us, and therefore it's whatever works with us then could work also in other Western countries. This is, of course, very generalizing. But then this decolonial subject is pretty much interesting, and I would like to ask you like one more question in that regards. Do you think that do you see that there are the tendencies in the government as well, in the state, on the state level, whether they're fighting with it or distinguishing the concepts of where the culture should stand and distinguishing the concept of the decolonization, of getting free in terms of a nation?
Well, there is a new cultural concept which has been discussed and highly debated. It is mostly debated because the criticism was towards the concept because it says how and what the government is going to fund. So people are saying that the policy should be more liberal. It shouldn't say that these kind of topics and themes are supported by funding. It should really be liberal and support good initiatives. Doesn't matter whether ideologically those initiatives correspond to the government's vision or not. So this is what and many from the opposition even framed the new concept as neo-Bolshevik concept, because it says what should be supported by the government, and that is not what we want. I am speaking about the critics. I would say that while the conversation about decolonization is definitely there, while there is also this understanding that all this bigger conversation comes from Ukraine, basically, because it boldly brought it into this conversation, into this discourse, saying that what is happening is decolonization, whether you want to theoretically frame it that way or not, but this is what we feel and this is what we think about it. So while there is this recognition that this concept comes from there is also recognition that we are undergoing that process among part of the cultural, part of the people from the cultural sphere. It doesn't mean that all people share this concept and believe that this is what is happening, but that conversation is there. That conversation is supported also by some of the ruling party members. And for example, very recently after the Karabakh War, one of the main classics of the Armenian literature, which is Yehišé Čaren's The Land of Nairi, was published again. And it was published and edited by a member of the Civic Contract Party who is from the from the literature background. And the main, I would say, the narrative formed around it, and then it was a series also of TV programs based on this new edition, was about the thing that this book, which was written in the beginning of 20th century, was already speaking about Russia as also. It was not only against Turkey, but it was both Turkey and Russia who were, in a way, if we speak from today's perspective and using the colonial lens, were colonialists with respect to Armenia. So that conversation is there, but it doesn't mean that it is heavily the text of the government. What comes is more about that we need to define ourselves. So it's not speaking about West versus Russia. It's about I would say redefining what Armenia is. It's about redefining what being Armenian is. It's about redefining us in this particular time and in this particular space. So that's also decolonial. If you look from the broader decolonial perspective, redefining yourself from your perspective, from your place of being, is already decolonial. So that language is widely shared by the ruling party, by the government, particularly by the prime minister, because most of his new ideas are about redefining ourselves. Whether it is shared by general public or most of the citizens, that's another issue. But it is fact that this is one of the main narratives from the government. And as some of you might probably know, it includes, for example, speaking about the current Republic of Armenia, so on the territory of the internationally recognized territory, excluding Nagorno-Karabakh, excluding Mount Ararat, even though it has been a significant part of the identity, but redefining this as a state and not as people, or not kind of having this dream. And as the prime minister, he phrases like real Armenia versus historical Armenia. Some of my friends say it's not real Armenia versus historical Armenia, it's real Armenia versus imagined Armenia. So this process is happening, and it is in itself the colonial process. It's not only about decolonizing yourself from bigger empires you have been part of, but it's basically about redefining yourself. And it's a very also, I would say, emancipating process, because if you take the responsibility of redefining yourself, it is emancipating from different other things. Whether people share this particular concept is a different issue. And what part of it is shared, what part of it is not, it's also a different issue.
Yeah, thank you, Luciana. Yeah, indeed, it's a brave process, and wish you luck with this. I understand it's painful, but it's a necessary process anyway, and it's hard to imagine. Like, I would like to address to Ia as the expert in the field of tourism and culture as well. Well, we talked about with Lucina, and we touched with Alina as well, the forms of survival. And these days, what you can tell us about where we as a Georgians these days could stand, and how we can survive the culture and reshape the concepts? Because in fact, what we're talking about, maybe it seems that we a little bit went out of the subject of the economy, but in fact, without identifying ourselves where we stand and how we want to be presented in the world, and should we be decolonized, or should we be presented as as a unique nation, and so on and so on. All those questions, they are also pretty much related to the economical benefits, because like what we, let's say, sell is ourselves, that how we can benefit from this, like culturally and economically. So yeah, I would like to ask you to respond to this subject. What are these ways?
I think, first of all, that cultural society, and you know whom I mean, because they are our common friends or people who are like still in protest, and so we meet them every next day. And first of all, we don't have to lose this knowledge, experience, and support each other. I mean, if some people who are in culture, and also like a general population, they have to support some artists or like their way to develop. This is one thing. Because I don't hope that government one day, like it's very soon, they will one day awake and do some good things, or they will speak to people who are very well educated, to a pretty smart and experienced. And important thing is for me, first of all, again, people. Second is that I think that still Georgia is open for international travelers and tourists, and this is very important. This is like a magic and important key to introduce our culture to the rest of the world. But what to introduce, we have to be very careful to keep this culture. And let's say, what's our identity? It's like wine, and we can present it through wine tourism. It's traditional gastronomy, and we can present it through gastronomy. Of course, the rest of the culture, material culture, non-material culture, all this combination. And so without showing identity of the country and people, original population, in the world, there's no experience that someone managed to develop quickly. And so culture is not for only one nation. Culture belongs to international world as well. And so with the educational program and the support, this is the only thing how we will survive.
And do you think that under this pressure that we are at the moment, the culture businesses are capable of being sustainable in our country? Do we still believe that are the tendencies of this for foreign tourists they're changed within the last years?
So
What is
until we have foreign tourists, until we have commercial cultural sites, which is also like a picture gallery, for example, yeah. So we still are a little bit safe, let's say. It's not sustainable, but we are safe because someone is coming, visiting a museum, is paying. And this museum, so many people work there, they're guides, they share information. So culture without commercial things, it's impossible because maybe 120 years ago, it was only like a culture and supported by governments, but now situation is changed and even small aspects and small segments of culture, like private museums somewhere in the region, or a place where you can you can be introduced by local food traditions. This is also part of culture. Yeah, until they exist, someone is paying, so there is a chance.
Okay, and what you would say in reference to what Alina and Lucina mentioned about this wave, while us being in resistance as well, because in Georgia there is as well resistance as we all know, and the culture field is on the front line, maybe on the front line, like the first who is affected. What do you think? Is there any hope?
I can say that it fully depends on us, how we will react, how we will act. And when I say we, who we? So this is like a prominent educated Georgian society, and it depends on them, how we'll react.
Thank you. So I would like you, if anyone want to add something, please do briefly, like within a minute or so, and then this will be all of our conversation. It's such an interesting subject, and with such an inspiring speakers, we can keep on talking and talking. It's really great, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. So if you would like to add a few words, please. Lucina or Alina, whoever.
Yeah, I think I would add that I think it's quite important to exchange the experiences, even we are in kind of a different situation. Luckily, I would say, comparing to our case, but still, it's kind of inspiring also and interesting to know what's going on in each of the country on a cultural sphere. And yeah, and I think like this kind of exchange is important. So I would thank you for all these meetings that you organize and all these connections you make. And I think it's very valuable for us also.
Thank you, Alina. We're looking forward, and we hope that the situation in Belarus will go change to the better pretty soon. And I know that you're working hard for this. It can't be different because so many people are working for this, so it will change pretty soon, I'm sure. Lucina, please.
I would like to second Alina. I think these kind of exchanges are very important, and I think that we need to have a bigger network which would help each other in times of trouble, because we live in a very vulnerable world and you never know when this trouble comes. It's good to have a bigger network of similarly thinking people. Thank
Yeah,
you
we
for the
definitely
opportunity.
thank you. We definitely have already this decolonial concept that gives us a possibility to build up network on this. Like looking forward, maybe we'll start the conversations in that direction. Thank you, Lucina. Iya, I would like also to ask you to say some few words.
So first of all, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, for your efforts to organize this. And I think this kind of meetings, conversation, even online, they're very important. And so if you will continue, I'm happy to support you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And unfortunately, we haven't had any questions yet. We've double checked, but we're looking forward for our communication in future and pretty many ideas. I'm pretty sure we have lots of things in common and looking forward talking to you again and working to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your evening.